Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, bringing you another Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's instalment, I shall be reviewing the IL-2. To provide you with a brief historical overview of the IL-2 Sturmovik, and indeed the variant depicted here in War Thunder, we begin in 1938 with Sergei Ilyushin's original design. As part of his team at the Russian Central Design Bureau, the IL-2 Sturmovik was designed as a purely ground attack aircraft, incorporating, at the time, a unique amount of armour for the main fuselage. Averaging at 7mm in thickness and extending up to 12mm behind the cockpit, the plane was intended to make it back to base safe and sound, even when put under pressure. The first prototype, TSKB-55, saw its first flight as of the 2nd of October 1939, and was nicknamed the Flying Tub, thanks to the fact that it had that ridiculous amount of armour and the pilot was quite low seated in the plane. The plane's prototype was in direct competition with the Sukhoi Su-6, winning this competition by the end of 1939. Nonetheless, further test flights actually showed TSKB-55 underperformed thanks to an AM-35 inline engine producing only 1,350 horsepower, and it was an engine optimised for higher altitudes, quite contradictory to the role of the plane. By the middle of 1940, however, a second prototype, TSKB-57, was produced, fielding an AM-38 engine, another inline type, with 1,700 horsepower and optimisation for lower altitude performance. Additionally, this prototype was to see the switching of a two-man crew, one pilot, one rear gunner firing a 12.7mm, to a single-manned crew of just the pilot. This of course reduced the overall weight of the plane and therefore allowed the second prototype to live up to performance expectations. However, this was to come at a cost. TSKB-57 was quickly refined into the future IL-2 as of 1941, and in March 1941 the IL-2 was swept into full production, with the first IL-2 units appearing in May of 1941, just 1 month prior to the German invasion of Russia as part of Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941. It is with this that we see the overall problem of removing that rear gunner in terms of the combat sessions that the IL-2 was to face. The plane, if left unhindered, was an absolute monster thanks to its combination of two 23mm VR cannons in the wings, and the ability to mount either RS-82, RS-132 or up to 600 kilograms of bombs. This meant that the IL-2 could quickly clear out tanks and other ground units, or indeed infantry, thanks to the addition of also two 7.92mm machine guns. Two 7.62mm Schwarz machine guns. Nonetheless, if the German Luftwaffe was able to catch on to an IL-2, and thanks to the lack of top support from other Russian pilots, the IL-2 was quite regularly exposed in this regard, then the plane had to live up to its expectation of being the flying tank, absorbing tremendous amounts of damage, and there are some rather remarkable stories of IL-2s making it back to the airfield with very little control surface, navigation left standing. Nonetheless, the losses were high, and German pilots quickly found that they could come up quite close behind our IL-2s and aim for either the wing spars, or they could attack from above and aim directly down into the cockpit, killing the pilot very quickly. It was only with the arrival of the IL-2M variant in February of 1942, with the 12.7mm rear turret being added back in, that the IL-2 was to find protection against the German Luftwaffe if none was offered by friendly fighters. Nonetheless, over the course of the Second World War up into 1945, a staggering 36,163 IL-2 aircraft were to be produced of all variants, and this is a testament to how much the Soviet military relied on what was perhaps one of the best and most durable ground attackers of its generation. Indeed, the variant depicted here, the original IL-2, went down in history as pretty much one of the biggest workhorses of the Russian Air Force, up until the arrival of the more high-powered fighter types and indeed the later developed ground attackers and bombers, always having its place on the battlefield even at the end of the Second World War. With that being said, how exactly does the IL-2 handle in War Thunder? Well, as we're about to go head to head with an enemy Beaufighter Mark 6, we quickly see that opening fire at ridiculously long range, i.e. roughly 0.8 km closing into 0.7, means that we can put our 23mm cannons, 2 of them, 1 in each wing, and our 2 7.62mm Schwarz machine guns, 1 in each wing, to great use. This plane does indeed become quite the monster, so long as you keep it down low. However, we're about to orchestrate that a little bit further. We are on the ground strike map, Alpine Meadows, and this is the last gameplay I will show from patch 1.41. The setup I'm using is a gun convergence of 500 meters. The reason for this is so I can get an ample amount of spread off of my machine guns and cannons. As you can probably see, I have no external ordnance. I want this plane at full performance, and I want to be able to drive enemy fighters, attackers and bombers into the ground as efficiently and as cleanly as possible. The extra ordnance will actually hold this plane down quite heavily. Even with just some rockets, you can already feel the performance issues. And indeed, if we recall our approach on that Wellington bomber at the start and our attempt to gain altitude, we found that it was quite the struggle, and you will find that more so with the more ordnance you provide. With the full RS-82 and roughly, I say, 500 kilogram bomb loadout, leading to a huge drop off in performance in general. As we move on with our overall setup, we also have the tracer belts for the 7.62mm machine guns and the omni-purpose load for the 23mm cannons, and we will move on to those shortly as we need to discuss this dogfight. I'm on the back of a Spitfire Mark 1A, and as we can see that while I am in a commanding position trying to shake the Spitfire off of a friendly tail, it's very difficult to keep up with the enemy fighter until I can get them out on the level. The reason being that whilst we do have quite a decent turn circle, and I will go into that a little bit further, the problem is we have to stabilise our aircraft at all points. By comparison with, say, the Spitfire Mark 1A, this plane is rather heavy-handed in its responsiveness at low or high speed. So as a result, as we dodge this F4F-4 Wildcats approach by quickly turning into the mountain and coming up behind them to achieve a glancing blow, we see that we have to be very succinct and controlled in our manoeuvres. And as I almost go into a mountain, levelling out in a stall just in time and kicking the rudder around to avoid the mountain, we can see once again we have to be very careful with our overall control and our manoeuvres that we employ. Simply because, whilst our fighter opponents are able to be very nimble and deft in their movements, we always have to make sure that we stabilise the aircraft in time to make our next manoeuvre and judgment. We set an F2A Buffalo, the -3 variant, on fire, and we begin to break away. Despite our overall performance in terms of speed on the level by comparison with our fighter opponents, our battle rating of 3.0, we are able to put ourselves at some distance and then come back in for another run on the Wildcat. This time we achieve a critical extending into a kill, making our ace, and now we have to contend with that Spitfire Mark 1A, who is relentless in their pursuit of us. But it is this point that we depict how much protection that armour plating gives us in terms of dogfighting with a more manoeuvrable and rather desperate foe. The Spitfire overshoots, crashing into the ground, allowing us to achieve our 6th kill, and we have another Spitfire Mark 1A coming on the back of us. As we can see, the light 7.7mm machine gun ammunition has very little effect on our overall fuselage or control surfaces. What's more, the Spitfire now has to contend with both myself and an F4F Wildcat, and as they come around for another head-on, we make sure just to keep coming at them, because they're either going to go for the ram, at which point we can rudder flick out the way, or they are going to have to break up out the way of our 23mm cannons. Another pass from the Spitfire sees us absorb even more damage, and yet we have no critical damage to the aircraft, despite the fact that our rear elevator section is starting to flash red. We try to get a long shot on the Spitfire Mark 1, but they are pulling away and breaking into a turn. Having been set on fire by a friendly Mitchell, we get some more glancing blows in and exhaust our 23mm cannon ammunition. We now have a P-36 Hawk that is coming around but not aiming at us directly yet, instead going for the Mitchell. And as we break around, we've got both an I-153 and a Spitfire Mark 1A coming towards us, and so, having reloaded our cannons, we're making full use of our rather powerful rudder and our moderate responsiveness down low in order to stay in the fight. At this point I've received critical damage to my elevators, but it's not enough to stop me from being able to kick the nose up at a slightly reduced rate. A Focke-Wulf 190A1 is about to find out how quickly an IL-2 can turn within its turn circle. And soon we're able to put in a little bit more damage, despite soaking up some 50 caliber fire from an unknown source. We're continuing to turn and forcing our plane to extend its web, achieving a critical hit on the Focke-Wulf and then another critical extending into a kill on a MiG-334, providing us with our 7th kill as we're right in the thick of it. We now have a P-36C Hawk, the one from earlier, dedicated to chasing us, and as we go up for this Focke-Wulf 190A1, kicking ourselves into a stall with our very weak performance in the vertical, the Focke-Wulf comes down on us, but fortunately goes into the ground, probably from a little bit too much speed and additional damage. The Hawk carries on, being relentless, so we just turn off our engine and apply landing flaps, forcing them to overshoot, and we can now use our rudder and rather brilliant turn circle, although it is not the equivalent of the Hawk, in order to stay behind them for an extended period. I soon realise the Hawk is going to outturn me and brake onto the back of me, so I'm just keeping my angle high and forcing my nose around. Simply because at 179 km/h speed, or roughly 180, the Hawk is very quickly going to overshoot, as depicted here. The Hawk builds up a lot more energy, or speed in terms of kinetic energy, and we force another overshoot, allowing us to come back around. Here the Hawk runs out of options and goes into the ground, simply because we've forced them into a situation whereby if they want to keep coming around on us, they've got to put the nose down. It allows us to achieve our 9th kill, and with a significant amount of damage achieved to our aircraft, we now begin to fly away, with a window of opportunity after a prolonged fight in the furball down at roughly 700 to 1000 metres altitude. I hope that furball has depicted two rather important traits. The fact that the amount of armour on this plane means you can soak up a tremendous amount of fire. Not only that, you also have quite decent manoeuvrability with low or moderate speed. For most of that dogfight we were at a speed ranging from roughly 170 to 250 km/h, and our speed only maximised up to about 350 km/h when we were able to make a break for it. We have a turn circle which is able to rival, say, that of the Messerschmitt 19 ML3, or indeed able to rival the KI-61 if we're at moderate speed. Most planes will be able to outturn you though, pardon me. And indeed the Spitfire Mark 1 or the Spitfire Mark 2, the P-36 Hawk, the KI-43, the A6M2 Raisin are all examples of planes which will easily outturn you and come onto the back of you. It's at that point that you can then use your ability to bleed speed very rapidly via a combination of switching off the engine and landing flaps, as done multiple times, in order to force your opponents to overshoot, or, in the worst case scenario, actually collide into the back of you, and sometimes allow you to walk off unscathed while their wing comes off completely, as I've had on a couple of situations, although I do not recommend this approach. Remember that P-36 Hawk? Well, another one's coming in and I believe it's the same player. They go for a head-on, but we quickly show that if they come at us head-on, we've got a huge amount of firepower to send their way. Again, going nose up has allowed us to bleed all of our speed off, and we want this because the Hawk does not have a very efficient armament. 150 cal, 130 cal means they've got to make successive runs. My engine is starting to die out, so I know I've got to force the Hawk into an overshoot position very rapidly. I keep kicking the nose up, forcing the WEP to maximum power, and using my rudder in order to flatten myself out and make the Hawk having to keep turning to stay with me, as they're not implementing their rudder to full effect. Soon we force the Hawk into another overshoot, and we come down like a ton of bricks. Almost achieving our kill, and then our second hit making another glance. The Hawk at this point tries to break some distance, but comes right into our firing line. It's our optimum opportunity to achieve our double ace. As we can see there once again, we utilised the fact that we had a weakened engine thanks to the damage we had received, and forced another overshoot, directly over our airfield fortunately, so we can go land. However, with that being said, it's not over yet. And so now we return to the discussion of armament, which I cut off at the start in order to discuss that rather extended dogfight. The reason I used the tracer ammunition for the 7.62mm machine guns is because it is made up, I believe, of APIT rounds or armour piercing incendiary tracer. This means that whilst you do not have many machine guns in order to have a rather shotgun effect at close range, instead you can use the machine guns as incendiary rounds, to achieve the occasional burnout on an enemy plane, i.e. setting them on fire and then leaving them to crash into the ground. The main focus of the armament is in the 23mm cannons, and the reason why I elect for omnipurpose is because the alternative, ground attack, does not have many of the FIT rounds, fragmentation incendiary tracer. These rounds are a rough equivalent to high explosive. They lack the explosive punch of HE, however when instant on target they fragment and essentially have a very nice chance of either damaging a control surface or killing the pilot quite easily. As a result, it is the omnipurpose belt, which is made up of a good proportion of FIT rounds and a couple of armour piercing rounds, which means that this plane can still go on the ground attack role if necessitated. It is this belt which means that you can perform consistently against ground targets and air targets alike. If of course you go for the ground attack role, I would elect the armour piercing rounds, or the armoured belt. Once again a Spitfire comes directly at us, a Spitfire Mark IIB. We achieve a critical at long range thanks to the fact they probably have low convergence, otherwise we may not have been so lucky. The enemy I-153 fires rockets at us and we have to break out to avoid the probability of being hit by one. It's at this point that whilst the I-153 can gain on us quite quickly thanks to a very tight turn circle, we can use our more powerful engine to break some distance and allow them to be harassed by some friendlies. And we've got another P-36C Hawk coming after us. So once again we are going to abuse the same tactic of forcing them into a rough overshoot. Although this one's a little bit smarter, they decided to boom and zoom run us. And so we begin our relentless pursuit, although once they reach 0.9 kilometers, I decide to break away in order to try and lure them back into a turn fight. Although I quickly realise that actually I've encountered a P-36G Hawk, which is probably rather an awkward situation. We retrieve the pilot kill, at the same time absorbing moderate damage to the front, thanks to our armoured windshield preventing us from taking damage to the pilot section or indeed taking damage to the engine. We achieved, I think it's now our 12th kill, although don't quote me on that, and so we are really in a situation where this plane is now becoming the ultimate fear factor, although this has not dissuaded this P-36 Hawks from coming back after us again. Excuse me. So, we once again go for the direct head-to-head, simply because we can outmatch them for armament. And soon we quickly see that the P-36 Hawk is going for the ram in a head-to-head which will kill us both. I'm not up for that, so I pull up into a very tight loop, bleed all my energy off, and achieve a critical hit right on their main fuselage. I then level out to see an enemy IL-2 coming directly for me, and I decide to rudder and snap roll out of the way because I cannot go head-to-head with my own and expect the same result as with the Hawk. At this point I am having to recall all my manoeuvrability in order to absorb the fire from the Hawk whilst dodging the incoming fire from the IL-2. The IL-2 is almost in a stall like myself, however I am using my rudder to keep myself on the level whilst they come around in an extended turn circle. The Hawk is nowhere to be seen and so I just assume I'll have to roll with it and take the damage, although soon they actually crash into the ground for my 12th kill. This is at this point that I've been able to outmaneuver the enemy IL-2 and force them to go into what I believe is the tree line. Unfortunately, they didn't actually go directly into the trees, and so I have to pepper them with a few cannon rounds to finish off. Note here I took the wing off, because I attacked from a full-on above profile position. And that is my advice for when you want to take out an IL-2. You need to hit it from above. I get it in full profile whereby you can see the cockpit directly from above and the overall profile of the wings. Once again we have achieved a massive amount of damage thanks to the fact our opponents have tried to shred away at our armour, and our tail section is going to be very strong thanks to this. As a result, it's quite rare that you will actually lose your tail completely or suffer major elevator or rudder damage. Expect your deaths to come from the fact that your wings will come off if you are attacked from above, or pilot kills. Another alternative of course is losing the engine, and once again I'm already trying to break away back to the airfield, although I've got two Spitfires in my way, which means that this is going to be quite a rough ride. The first Spitfire I'm interested in is the one coming directly for me, keeping an eye on the other in case they try to converge in. This Spitfire Mark IIA, only with machine guns, can be quickly knocked out for my 14th kill thanks to the fact that they only have the machine guns by comparison with my cannons. At the same time the other enemy Spitfire did not coordinate, and as a result decided to attack the airfield and is now coming around. However, with 14 kills to my name, the Spitfire makes a mistake of taking me for a fear factor and instead breaks upwards, allowing me to achieve a critical hit and, as we're about to see, the triple ace. Meaning that as I rudder around and my engine begins to die out, I can just gradually meander back towards the ground and hopefully finish the game right here and now, simply because there's very little more I can get out of this aircraft. Returning to how to kill one of these, of course, it is preferable if you attack it either with a large concentration of incendiary rounds, and this is the case in the form of 50 caliber ammunition for, say, the the P-47 Thunderbolt, or if you go at it with cannon ammunition. The Focke-Wulf 190A1 is a good example of this, whereby its two 20mm cannons in the wings can make quick work of an IL-2 if attacked on the full profile approach. An alternative, of course, is to go for the head-on at extreme distances, and heavy fighters such as the Beaufighter, if allowed to approach by this means, can knock out your engine and your pilot if they're accurate enough. As a result, you are going to have to be very confrontational with the IL-2, or alternatively come at it from above, hit and run for your life. Simply because, if engaged in a turn fight, this plane has got a lot of assets in it in its arsenal to bring the advantage back into its favour. So, in reflection, we can see that our 15 kills allowed us to earn 27,555 silver lions. On top of this, we earned 1,776 research points, with 710 going towards our research on the LA-7B-20. We conclude this review of the IL-2 by noting that whilst it is a ground attack plane, it also doubles up as quite the effective low altitude fighter if played below 2,000 metres. To offset the poor high altitude performance, and indeed the poor performance in the vertical in terms of looping and climbing, you have quite a strong rudder, a turn circle to rival that of the Messerschmitt 19 ML3, and brutal durability combined with deadly armament. You can soak up the hits and give the damage back in the form of two 23mm VR cannons, and as a result, if you cannot outturn your foe, you can force them to overshoot thanks to the combination of switching your engine off and deploying landing flaps. Head-to-heads are also an option, but be wary of planes armed with rockets or with multiple cannons, such as the Beaufighter Mark VI and the Dornier 217J1. Heavy fighters will be your downfall at a battle rating of 3.0. If you are flying a fighter and looking to beat the IL-2, you will need to attack it from above, like many German pilots found out in the Second World War. From above and in full profile, the cockpit is exposed and at its minimum armour level. What's more, if you can aim for the wings and hit the wing spars at the full profile from above, you can rip the wings off quite nicely, especially if you land a couple of 20mm shells where it counts. Still, as we can see by comparison to the rest of our team, we used our plane strengths to great effect in order to achieve first place by quite a margin, simply because we forced our opponents to play our game and not have to chase after them when they could have boom and zoomed us on a number of occasions. As a result, if you are looking for a plane which can act as ground attacker or fighter and deliver black death to the battlefield, meaning that no foe is safe regardless of how far they run, then the IL-2 is the plane for you. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies!